So
Okay.
up next, as we continue the peer-to-peer benchmarking session, and we will have our roundtables after this, where we'll go into Zoom in a closed-door session, and we can kind of benchmark further where our automation journeys are, the results, etc. I do want to welcome Brandy and Pem to the stage. Brandy being the VP of Global Delivery at Indico, and Pem being the Director of Service Line Specialist, Intelligent Automation Insurance at Cognizant. I think part of the benchmarking opportunities are to avoid some of the mistakes that we see. And as we all start to or continue to scale our IDP, process mining, chatbots, RPA journeys, it is really important to understand what some of those pitfalls might be and how we can stay ahead of the curve. So Brandy, Prem, feel free to turn your camera on and welcome to the stage.
Great. Thanks, Marie. Excited to be here with Prem. Brandy Corbella, VP of Global Delivery here at Indico Data. Prem will introduce himself right after we talk about really quickly what we will be discussing today. So we're going to talk a little bit about, Prem and I thought about this for a while, like what are the 3 mistakes to avoid in IDP in your enterprise? And we came up with 3 that we think will resonate likely with a lot of people as they start scaling out their automation program. So the 3 we're going to dive deep into for purposes of this are going to be, thinking about siloed solutions, change management, and then lastly, unlocking and maximizing the data that you now have access to. And before Prem introduces himself, Prem, after you introduce yourself, I think it would be good for folks to understand what's the difference between OCR and IDP, and how do we define that?
Awesome. Perfect. So my name is Prem, and I'm part of Cognizant, and I've been associated with intelligent automation for past 7 years. We've worked across multiple customers and leading their setting up their vision and also leading them into the IDP and intelligent automation strategy. So happy to be here, and Brandy and I we were excited towards talking about our experiences. That's more important because as we share these across learnings across multiple of the participants today, there is going to be some of the learnings which they can apply back into some of their implementations what they're doing. So with that, Brandy, that's a common question which we keep getting about OCR versus IDP. OCR, optical character recognition, is just a very small piece of the puzzle, which is let's just pass a document. There are techniques in which it picks up the data and then translates it back. There is no intelligence or anything, just a more input output type of a function. Whereas IDP gives a very large ecosystem and gives the power of using the trends in the technology and how we can use it to maximize the outcomes. Right? IDP, intelligent document processing, I would say, is a blend of both OCR. We also use unstructured document techniques like machine learning, AI. And as the industry progresses towards semantic AI, those things come into place. But also we resonate that with how those data could be used for better decision making, right? So that's what we have seen from an IDP, and that sets the class apart between what OCR versus what carriers or industries can use out of IDP.
Yeah, totally. I think whenever we talk about it, OCR is a part of IDP, right? But it's really just a small part of it. So it's more about how do you, integrate or think about machine learning and really enhancing OCR capabilities.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Perfect.
the first mistake we wanted to talk about was siloed solutions. So maybe, Prem, define from a Cognizant point of view, what is a siloed solution?
Yeah, so I would, siloed solution predominantly, I would say, roll back 5 years before. Industries have invested on, okay, I have a problem, I'm going to go ahead and implement a solution for it, right? So that's been, I would say, good that point of time. But now, we should not go ahead and add ecosystem which increases the technology debt, right? Which has been very seriously looked at into from various organizations. Can I maximize my investment of one solution and thereby try to get a blend of the outcomes? But in reality, that doesn't happen, right? The reason, because it's not one solution which can solve for a particular, solve a particular problem. But what we have to see is, I have an X investment made, or I have a set of vision which I've already put in place, how I can try to add in some more elements into it so that I can give what the business is actually asking. Right? So that's how we are looking at going into the views here. But Brandy, let me just start with the strategy out there, right? Because that's where things start rolling. Maybe before I answer that in detail in subsequently, but I would say that I'll put a question back to you to say that how do we avoid falling into the trap of a siloed solution, right? So let's address that, right? So maybe that sets the ball rolling.
Yeah, so before I came to the dark side of being at the product company, I was actually a customer and operationalized automation internally at Cushman & Wakefield. And I think prior to that, I was a consultant at EY, so just have seen a lot of like mistakes of all these siloed solutions. And I would say, lessons learned there, or how to like avoid that trap of having all these siloed solutions, which would like end up in technical debt. Mm-hmm. What we did at Cushman is we took a step back, right? So we said across the organization, what problems exist, and like what's the commonality across those problems, right? So in commercial real estate, it was a ton of leases. Not just leases though, we had all these other documents too, and like you could have created like siloed solutions for each of the use cases, as well as, or like you could have taken it a little bit further and just done it per document, right? So there were like all these like different technologies that could solve that problem. But when you're able to have this top-down assessment, right, mm-hmm. like from like the top of the org and like spread yourself across the organization, you're able to understand like what are all of the problems we're trying to solve, and is there a solution or like a stack of technologies, right? But at least creating some sort of like platform that could solve all of these. So I think for us, we really took that approach of what are our top-down problems that are causing the most pain across the organization, mm-hmm. and like how do we create a stack, right, that is actually becomes an automation platform for the organization.
That's really good, right? So because that's where it actually defines the way, clearly articulated. That's where the strategy is defined in the way what the organization want to do 6 months down the line, 18 months, and absolutely 36 months down the line, right? So that clearly defines, and you're not going to boil the entire ocean. And we can also set the expectation to the stakeholders. Yes, this is the point of time when we can have the conversation and ensure that your needs are being met, right? So give him that confidence of what we're going to make. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's a great approach, Brandy.
Yeah, and I think just understanding like the degree of like variation, like not just like across the documents, but within like documents or like content that needs like human intelligence over it to really interpret it, mm-hmm. is a huge part of like understanding, because you may have some structured, you may have some semi-structured and some unstructured. So you've got to think about something that creates like breadth or scale across like all of those different use cases or like different variations.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I'm going to poke a question back at you.
Sure, yeah.
So, like as you think about creating this technology stack that mm-hmm. really enables automation and solves like pain and mm-hmm. creating a platform across the organization, like how can, folks define what solution best fits their enterprise needs once they have that strategy in place?
Yeah, that's a very pertinent question to ask, right? So now once we define the strategy, now we have to really look at, rubber hits the road. But what typically, I was like alluding before, there is no one solution which fits all the needs, right? So maybe there has been an X investment made at a corner of an organization, and there is a Y investment being made. But for example, like being from an insurance, I'll typically look at it. There is a very important form which is like CMS 1500, a lot of volume. It's sort of very structured, a handwriting and a combination of things which happen. But that's what people are typically look to solve. Hey, this is what I need to digitize. I go into a fit in, but you also see medical records, legal documents coming into the mix. That hey, that's process a very different problem, right? So how can I do it? So we are left with a conjuring scenario in which saying that what should I do here? Right? That's where what we have been advocating is about use a multi-tool approach, right? Multi-tool in the way that it's not that you bring in like 20, 25 tools, but very focused, as we define the strategy, what are my low-hanging fruits and what is my high value, then understand that, look at about a 2 to 3 tools type of a strategy, and then how you can go and deploy. And most importantly, what we are seeing here is a lot of these software as a service solutions are coming in the IDP space, which is actually helping the transition pretty smooth. So you have an X solution, you can try to use it for say 3 years or a 4 year down the line, and then you don't have to get into the technology debt of investing something, bringing into the organization. So that's what makes this process pretty seamless. And what we also look at a shaft and wheel concept of, you have an anchor tool, say maybe Indico is one such example. It continues to be the anchor tool. We talk about document classification and indexing. It continues to do that. But if there is a specialized need, it sort of routes it into an approach in the way that it picks up and then able to do it, right? So that's the way we have tried to see how it actually fits into the ecosystem, right? And last but not least, what I'm looking at here is a unified visualization platform, which is very important. In the sense, if you look at it, people move across the organization, and but department A has one interface for the document, but department B has different one. Sort of takes in a lot of training, procedures, etc. But what we are also pushing it forward is about have a unified interface, role-based access, etc. come in. Across the organization, everybody gets to see a seamless view for maybe human in the loop as well as their interaction which happens, but also look at into a unification of the data, which we'll be talking later. That gives us a big uplift in the way that people can drive this particular efficiency across the enterprise.
Yeah, so it gives you, and I think this is a common theme coming up, is it gives you composability in your automation orchestration behind the scenes, right? Yeah. You have like all these different technologies, not different technologies in the sense that you have these siloed solutions, but you have a nice like stack that's composable, right? And could solve like most of your pain in the organization. But at the same time, it allows you to continue to have a consistent user experience with the end users, which is really important for process automation. So, I think our first mistake on avoiding siloed solutions that, I think we've seen it just given where the industry and the market's been, but have, 2 or 3 different things in place where they could replace it with one and really think about getting rid of some of that technical debt likely that they have. But for those that are just starting, it allows them to think about having broader conversations across the organization.
That's right. Yep.
Great. So, our second common mistake that we wanted to talk about that we've seen a lot is around change management.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you this question, Prem, what is the ecosystem that you believe is relevant for a successful rollout for IDP?
Yeah, I would say, it's a very interesting, question, because it's where, the solution is where it puts the organization to a test. Typically what we have seen, it's either a business direction or it's an IT direction, right? So whereas this type of solution puts us in a very a different ecosystem where all 3 elements, I would add the dimension of the third element also here, comes together to define the overall vision, right? Because it's a business need. It also has an IT direction, but it also has a strategy element where enterprise architecture have to come and define it, right? So it's not a sole responsibility of IT. So how we have done certain successful implementation is have a automation or a transformation champion, identified in across LOBs who leads that particular program, who then works with multiple operations and business leaders out there to identify and synthesize their information, right? So that's an important role or a program role, which is defining the strategy to a implementation vision and then work it through, supported by the process excellence team. A lot of organizations have that lever in it, saying what are the Six Sigma type of a work which comes in. So that's one part of it. The second part of it, the rigor of implementation, is where the IT teams would come in, where we bring in maybe the cloud ecosystem or the implementation team. Integration becomes the key here because you need to do the back and forth integration with the downstream application. So that's where the IT. The strategy part is where we look at enterprise architecture, defining it, right? Typically, we go and ask customers, hey, do you have an AI strategy in place? Which is it's a loosely coupled fabric, I would say, which defines what should come in and what are the moving parts, what should not be done. That defines it so that you typically have that control in place. And most importantly, the outcome predictable, right? I'm not going to invest money on or a sunk cost somewhere else, right? I need to get the output. So that's how this ecosystem comes into place. But I would also like wrap up this with one important point here is have a very specific evaluation criteria, be it your new use case coming in or a new department coming in. We need to have a very strong evaluation criteria to say, hey, is it going to be a long-term impact for my organization, or it's just like one odd request which comes in? Maybe it is done in a digitized way or in a very different way to approach it. So that's a very important evaluation criteria. And always keep the outcome at sight, just not to focus on the implementation per se. Right? That's what I've seen from a change management. But actually, Brandy, that leads to a very important question. Okay, I did talk about the strategic elements, the ecosystem coming in together, but how do we then demonstrate it? Now it's all about action, how we can look at, but how can somebody demonstrate to the enterprise leadership, because these are enterprise related implementation, on the success of such an implementation across the organization? Can you throw some light around that?
Yeah, I think this is actually a really important topic that gets missed often, right? Because the executive team is likely, in charge of like funding and like budgets, and they want to know, as they're making investments, that they're getting value out of those investments, whether that value is intangible or tangible. So, I think the best advice around this is, thinking about like MVPs. So like a lot of time I've seen, in my consulting, as well as operationalizing this, like folks really want things to be like perfect the first day it goes into production, whether that's the business or the end users. And I think what's really important here is getting, 20% on day one is actually a good thing, right? Because then you can start working towards 40% automation and 60% automation, rather than, like having an increased lead time from a time to value perspective for the executive. So I think, taking that like agile mindset and really like defining MVP, and then how you're going to really see a better trajectory through time on what the automation can do is really important. That's with IDP, it's with RPA, it's with anything in automation. I will say, unstructured documents are still a big challenge, from an organizational standpoint. Like you have to make sure that you have the right user experience. And I think executives want to know that the folks that are like performing these tasks, because you do have to operationalize it with human in the loop with the business, are happy with the technology that's augmenting them, right? So that really comes down to the employee experience. And if executives are hearing good things from, the people who are really like tasked with using this technology, then I think they know, especially with the market today, like, oh, I could decrease like my, attrition that I have, and I could like really focus on retention because it seems like the employees are happier. So I think that's a big part of it. And then lastly, I would say like measure what matters. I think sometimes we get into like all of these, different measurements of value, but, things like ROI and like employee satisfaction are really important. And I think, sometimes in this space, we get a little turned around on accuracy, and it's not necessarily about accuracy, right? It's, have I augmented the time to review a document or an image, and by how much, right? Because if something was taking me an hour to review and now it's 10 minutes, that's significant. And have I created like downstream, like structured output that can be like processed faster in all these other applications in the organization? So I think that would be like really like my advice around like executive leadership, because they really do care about ROI. And I think like now, like we're hearing more so, like employee satisfaction, right? Just given like the current market conditions.
That's true. That's a very valid point, how you've summed it up, Andy. That's
So I think, like on this topic, Prem, what would you say are, we're talking about executive buy-in, we're talking about the strategy, but what are the tactical guardrails that the team should be aware of as they think about this?
That's very important, right? So what we talked about tech debt, right? We also look at the ongoing maintenance and support. Typically, if you look at any of these, there is a level of investment which is made or spend which is made with respect to the support aspect of it, which is again not substantial, but it is still has a cost associated with it. So what we look at is, if you take a template-based approach, for example, right? So you see that there's a lot of relatively higher maintenance, because there is template which keep changing. There are templates which are government mandated, compliance mandated, which continues to change. But how do I, that's a very difficult thing to maintain, right? So maybe look at the approach. What we have taken is typically take a quarterly or a half yearly cycle to reduce the the impact of such template changes and try to adopt or implement that into the ecosystem. The second way here is like, there is a tendency always to see that, hey, I have got a new template, make the changes. There are additional data fields which needs to be extracted. So that sort of back and forth, changes also impacts the overall productivity, because the measure completely changes into a different direction. And there are a lot of these corner cases which gets added into it, which instead of solving for a bigger use case, we end up solving for a very small piece of the puzzle here, right? So those are something which we want to avoid. What we're trying to look at is try to optimize what we wanted to do. Forecast what is the type of template changes, what are you going to come in. This is what has bugged down a lot of our people about changing it. But when we are able to consistently make the change, there's been very less of a change management initiative, which again comes in with making these tactical changes, right? So that's something which I've seen across, and we try to alleviate such a set of type of interventions when we want to do it, right? But that actually leads to a very important aspect. We just talked about this, but when I ask this question, right? So if I'm an implementation team or I'm a customer, I ask that, when should I be aware when it comes, what should I be aware when it comes to end users and the process analysts who are using these IDP, right? What is those top 2 or 3 things which you can share, Brandy, in this case?
Yeah, I think, don't forget about the people, right? Yeah. And that's like something we used to scream all the time, because, the people who perform, these tasks today are going to need to be able to use this technology, and it's something they need to be comfortable with, as well as excited about. So, I think when it comes to like not forgetting about the people or the process analysts, it's all about, like their acceptance as well as adoption, because you can't really capture value if folks don't want to adopt the technology.
Yeah, that's true.
So I would say just quickly, it's really important to bring them along the journey, like from start to finish, right? Yeah. Like you can't just like do it to them. It needs to be like done with them. And then really like ensuring that the people are like reskilled or upskilled, and not just being able to use the technology, but like in their new roles, because you've likely unlocked capacity to do, more value add like things that you weren't able to do previously.
That's true. That's that's the way we need to look at it. But I just want to add one more point here, before we move into the third silo here, is that a lot of these ecosystem or the tools ecosystem, I'm again wanted to talk about Indico here, is about enabling the citizen development, right? That's a very important point. It's not that, these development or these machine learning is always a data scientist or an expert who has to come and do. It's become so democratized now, where the end user itself can start configuring these documents and make it simple. That way their involvement happens, like, they are on top of things and they know what is happening. It's just that they're not carried away by anything. That's an important point, which I just wanted to add it here. Perfect. Yeah, I think that's good, Brandy. Yeah. When we jump into the last part of it, which is more important here. Right?
Yeah, totally. I think, like change management is definitely a mistake that we've seen, whether that's like technical or it's like around like people, right? So it's important that folks think about that as they enter into their programs, or like if they're like kind of midstream starting to think about.
Yeah.
So our last mistake that we identified was all around unlocking and maximizing the data. So when you have a tool in place that's like structuring this data, like there's so much you can do with it. And I think sometimes folks are like missing that, right? They're just really focused on the process accelerating, but now you have access to this data. So how, Prem, if you like think about that, like how do folks like really maximize their investment when they think about unlocking that data?
Yeah, so that's a very important point. So my first thing is, hey, just look beyond SLAs. I just don't go focus on SLAs. But what I've actually seen here is this is such a massive scale that it is IDP is bringing in convergence of data. It is unlocking so much of data which is there in those documents and helps the whatever the downstream to make very reasonable decisions. In my case, I've worked with the multiple insurance carriers where they have looked at using this data. And we were able to build in certain predictive models outside the data, especially medical records and others, and be able to help the adjudicators or the claim handlers take very decision-oriented, data-oriented decisions here, so that, like be it fraud analytics or outlier cases, their downstream changes what they have to make. Most importantly, what is leading to is a hard outcomes, right? Especially when you look at efficiency play with respect to adjudicators. And most important in insurance cases, the reduction of the claim loss handling, right? Which is directly what the expense as well as the loss ratio. That's more important metric what we have seen. And also, lastly, I would say that, automate end-to-end process. This gives an opportunity to bring in robotics or system integration, which can provide us an end-to-end view as well, right? So that's more important. But I will just flip it out to you as well here, right? So what do you think, Brandy, right, basis your experience, that we should think that the value of how do we use this data beyond its current usage, right? Just more of a data extraction. And how do we ensure that this platform can perform such a task, right? So how do you define that?
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations, when they start their IDP journey, they're extracting the required data in order to process in a downstream application, right? So it may be like 10 labels or 10 fields that they need in order to process a transaction. And that's like really the strategy they go, and we need these fields and it needs to be sent to this system so that way we can transact it. And like, that it's amazing that we're able to accelerate not just the review time, but also have this like structured output so the downstream application can work as quick as possible. But you've actually created time, and there's likely data in those documents or in images that you're not capturing today that would actually be very valuable. So, I think a lot of times we talk about like, you've created capacity, right? So like, what are other like data elements that could be useful in your organization that you're not capturing today? That's one part of it. But then also like, now you have all this data in a structured way. So how do you actually think about creating products or embedding products in your services to really think about not just process acceleration, but potentially like revenue generation for the organization?
That's definitely how the way things are changing. If you look at, it's again a convergence of data. It is multiple data, right? We had cases where we have transcripts of contact center which have to be extracted. It's again a digital format, but you use ML to use if you have an opportunity to upsell, downsell. It's just not about documents coming in, but it is beyond that. We just have to look broader our viewpoint and see, hey, that's a potential data which we can ingest into the same model which is doing a claim or any of those extractions. So the opportunity is huge, but it's about how we always think beyond what a tool can do, or tool or process can do. It actually works wonders here. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, totally. So Marie, those are the 3 common mistakes Prem and I wanted to discuss. So 1, avoiding siloed solutions, 2, really thinking about the change management, and then 3, thinking beyond just the process and really looking to unlock and maximize your data. So I know we're kind of close on time, but we're happy to maybe take a question.
Brandy, Prem, thank you so much for not only recapping, but sharing with everyone, the areas to avoid. I think there's a lot of growth that we're seeing in the industry. We're seeing a lot of transformation and maturity at all different lens. So it's always important to understand the pitfalls to avoid, but also the change management piece, because you can't do anything without the change management and getting everyone bought in and being part of the journey. So it is a continuous journey, and I do want to thank you both for taking the time to share it with us this afternoon.
Great. Thanks, Marie.
Thank you.
Thank you.